What's up, guys? I'm BTC. Moira and Doomfist just got some minor buffs. Sombra got a nerf, and Reaper and Mei are going to get some pretty big buffs coming up real soon. So first, we're going to talk about the stuff that is on the live server right now, and then we'll get into the stuff that will be added to the PTR, what I think is probably going to be next week. So first up is Sombra. So I talked about this before. Her hack has been nerfed. It now will go on a 2-second cooldown whenever it's interrupted by damage. And it will now be more consistently interrupted when the target breaks line of sight. So basically what this means is the target starts to move away and will go behind a wall or uses some other sort of evasion ability, then the hack will simply stop and it won't work. So this is a nerf to Sombra. It makes the character require a little bit more skill and a little more careful planning in order to get those hacks, but it's not really that bad, and the character is still going to be pretty solid. There's also a couple of bug fixes that are effectively buffs. The first one is you just now get more properly credited for environmentals, and also the second one is you'll now be notified more often whenever you are detected by an enemy, because sometimes what would happen is you would get close to them, they would kind of see you, but it would never tell you that they saw you. So now you're just going to get that message a little bit more often. Just be more aware of who knows where you are and that sort of stuff. Next up, there was a whole bunch of bug fixes for Doomfist. Still the buggiest character in the game, but as you can tell, they are fixing a lot of that stuff. And I've been saying this for a little while. They have to fix the character first before they can start buffing, nerfing, doing all that stuff. Get the character actually doing what it's supposed to do, and then you can adjust it. Now, unfortunately, the biggest problem with the character still exists, which is the Ghost Punch. The hitbox for that is just way too small. So until they fix that, the character is still going to have, a pretty glaring flaw, but they're at least making progress. There's also some pretty important bug fixes with Moira. So the first one just has to do with the Biotic Orb. You're now going to get credit for more eliminations, which means Moira is probably going to get gold medal on elims all that much more often. The second one is the really important one, though. It says, fix the bug that causes Moira's fade visual effects to indicate the direction she was traveling in when she used the ability. So this is actually kind of a buff and kind of a nerf at the same time. For the lower skill players, it's probably going to be a buff because this means you can just use the fade and you don't really have to worry about the enemy seeing you and knowing what direction you're going to go. However, the higher skilled Moira players would actually use this sort of thing to your advantage. It's kind of like a head fake in football or basketball where the player will fake going to the left, but then very quickly switch it up and go to the right. Well, with Moira, you could kind of do the same thing. So you would enter the fade and kind of fake going to the left, but then as soon as you were completely invisible, you would go to the right. And what ended up happening is the other player would just go and chase you off to the left, even though you're not even there. So you could just attack them from behind or escape or do whatever you want. So you can't really do that anymore because now you just kind of like disappear, so they're going to have to kind of guess where you're going. But I mean, it's a little bit of a tactic. It's kind of a shame that it's going away, but, it's not really that big of a deal. So now we're going to go into the stuff that's going to be added to the PTR probably next week, and this is going to be for Reaper and Mei. So first up, though, I want to read you something that Jeff Goodman posted on the forums. He says, "We're always trying to get ahead of the meta and trying to predict what shifts are likely to take place. In this case, we're seeing some potential for a big tank meta on the horizon, especially with Moira just recently being released and how good she is at healing multiple tanks. We've actually had this sort of metagame in the past, and overall it often seemed more frustrating for players than even dive can be sometimes. So as a direct answer to your question, I'd certainly be worried about buffing heroes like Roadhog and Zarya and even Ana until we can get a better gauge on how the game is shifting. In fact, we're looking at buffing Reaper and Mei in an upcoming PTR patch, hopefully this week, since they could use a boost and they could help us with this meta if it comes around." He further commented on some potential changes for Mei and Reaper, so let's just run through those. For Mei, he said, "Cool thread. I always thought what would be cool is if Mei could freeze multiple people at once with her primary fire. Oh, wait a minute, I have the editor right here. And then for Reaper, in response to a question about whether or not he can just cancel out his Wraith form early, he responded with simply, "This would be pretty fun." So let's talk about these potential changes here. For the Mei one, that might be added, but I don't think that's the only thing they would add, for the simple fact that it really wouldn't do anything against triple tank or quad tank, because they're always going to run something with a barrier, whether it's a Reinhardt or an Orisa. And what's going to happen is Mei just won't be able to freeze anybody because she's not going to be able to get through the barrier. So it's just not going to be effective. They're probably going to have to change something else in addition to that. Now, as far as Reaper, I've talked about this quite a bit. In fact, in just my recent video, someone asked a question and I talked about it, was the Reaper being able to cancel the Wraith form. I think that is a great idea. I don't see any reason why not. Right now, the Wraith form is just far too predictable. What ends up happening is, when you see the Reaper go into Wraith form, you know that he can't do anything for several seconds. So you can just completely ignore him and focus on doing something else, because you know that he can't actually interact with anything for a couple seconds, so just why even bother paying attention to him? But if Reaper has the ability to cancel it early, well, now you have to pay attention. And now you can't just turn your back on him, because if you do, you're going to end up having a bad time. And really, I don't see any problem with this, again, because Mei can cancel her Ice Block early, so why not Wraith form, right? Now, another thing I think Reaper needs for a change is his teleport. First of all, it's an out-of-combat ability, so it's not entirely that powerful. You know, it's not like you can use it in the middle of a fight, because if you do, you're just going to get completely wrecked. But the problem with it is, one, it's the slowest ability in the entire game. Two, it's incredibly loud. Almost everybody on the map knows that he just used it. And three, it has an incredibly bright animation that everybody can see from a mile away. It's not quite as bad as High Noon, but it's still pretty up there. So the teleport definitely needs some little touch-ups on it to make it better. Now, as far as the character's damage as a whole, I think Reaper is in a pretty good spot with his damage. Maybe they could increase his lifesteal just a little bit, but I think the main thing that Reaper is kind of having a problem with is that his ultimate just doesn't really do what it needs to do. So Reaper is an anti-tank character, and yet his ultimate isn't really all that good against tanks, but also it's just not really that good compared to other DPS ultimates. It's a damage over time ability like Pharah's Barrage, except it does significantly less damage. On top of that, you have to be really close to the enemy, but you don't get the mobility that Genji has with his. Instead, you are moving incredibly slow, and the Reaper is just very vulnerable when he's using it. I mean, there's just a lot of kind of drawback to his ult. I mean, you can use it when the enemy is completely not expecting it, but that's about the only time it's effective, and even then, there's a lot of different things that can counter it. I mean, if they have a Roadhog on the enemy team, he doesn't even need to hook you in order to take you out of it. All he has to do is just attack you a couple times, and the Roadhog can just straight up absorb all the damage and, you know, take out the Reaper. It's not really that big of a deal. So I think his ult is probably the place where they could probably start making some improvements. And lastly, they also briefly mentioned Ana. So they said, we talked about a number of things we could do for Ana, but don't have any firm plans yet. I don't think she is super far off, and she does bring a number of tools that no other healer has access to. Currently, she is more a victim of the dive meta than anyone else, as she doesn't fit well in that environment. So I think what they're gonna try to do is wait to see how Brigitte affects everything, and if she has a pretty significant on kind of like hampering the effectiveness of the dive, then they're going to start addressing what Ana can be changed to make her also more effective. But for right now, it looks like they're just going to leave her as is. So what do you guys think about all these changes? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out my Discord server. Follow me on Twitch and Twitter. The links for that stuff are down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault. Also, special thanks to all my Patreon supporters for helping to make this all possible. If you'd like to see what kind of cool rewards you can get for supporting the channel, check the links on screen and down below.